and our closing panel. So please rejoin us. Love to have you in here. I'm still seeing a few people out there. And I also was asked to announce that we have a little backpack and a jacket sitting outside where the coffee and everything was. So if this is yours and you are feeling naked without your cell phone and your computer, we took your backpack hostage. So talk to the team, we have it. So I would, well, when we put the conference together, we said we need to bring in the labor perspective, which we did, and that was fantastic today, to also talk about the transatlantic relationship and labor. We brought in the skies and the space, also for the first time in our transatlantic conference. So we took off into space, which was a fantastic debate. We brought in a discussion on the global south, because we cannot talk about the transatlantic relationship without looking into the world. We talked also about the transatlantic partnership in the realm of our China relationship. Fascinating panel, and I was so happy that it was a panel also representing people who came from far and close. That was fantastic. And we couldn't do this panel if we talk this conference talking about trade and tech and the transatlantic relationship by also looking into the water, to look into maritime security, into the economics of oceans, the security of oceans, technology and infrastructure. And with this, I would like to ask our moderator to come up here to join me. There you are, to join me on the stage. You have already met him yesterday on our first panel, Ansgar. So happy that you're joining us again.
My pleasure. Hi, everybody.
And you promised me to bring up the energy.
Yes, I'll try.
What fascinates you about the topic?
I think it's interesting. We frame everything right now as geopolitical competition, right? And it's usually framed in this, it's the US versus China dominates everything as a template. I wonder where does cooperation, despite a lack of trust, start in this new world? So where could we cooperate on global issues? Where do we have common interests still? It seems like the maritime space might be one sector where actually cooperation is logical. Everybody wants to trade still, right? Not the same interests, but maybe there are some overlaps of interest that might suffice to actually do more than just compete. And this is something I want to explore with the panel.
Perfect. You just published a book, right?
Yes, and another one is coming.
Haha. And the title of your last book was?
The book already published is called Tech Cold War, Geopolitics of Technology. Book published in America, and the new one is published in Germany. Die Stunde der Nashörner. So it's about gray rhinos, risks, how corporations can manage geopolitical risks.
Do you think there are gray rhinos in the ocean?
Any biologist might scream now and run away. I think there are. I mean, just for context, gray rhino, the risk concept describes risks which are not impossible to detect, right? They're not black swans. They're rather easy to see if you look in the right corners, and still they are ignored. And that's the fascinating, much more fascinating than a black swan, right? Black swan is an overused concept, which usually doesn't apply. So the financial crisis wasn't a black swan. It was obvious to see if you would have looked at the right indicators. We didn't look at the right indicators, and the interesting question is why. And I think the same goes for geopolitics today. And in the maritime space, it's certainly, I think we got used to a positive externality of the unipolar moment, which is security of sea shipping lanes. So everybody assumes that, if in doubt, the US will send some troop carriers, and will make it safe again. And now, big question is, how does the world look like when that concept, when that positive externality is diminished or is challenged, and how do we actually organize the arteries on which we really rely as integrated economies worldwide?
So we are going to talk a little bit about what Donald Rumsfeld called the known unknowns.
Yes.
And maybe we learn a little bit more why those poor gray rhinos are the concept for that.
All right.
And with this, I hand it over to you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
All right. Thank you. I'd say join me on stage as a group. I will spare you guys. All of you can read, right? I assume, yeah. So you have all read who's on the panel. I don't need to introduce them at length. It's a pleasure to have a distinguished group here covering the complicated and wide space of maritime security of the future. Pleasure to have you here. I'm a land lover, so I'm not a maritime expert, as you will soon find out. Anyhow, only rule is no violence. Right? We agreed on that on the panel. Otherwise, please be very interactive. Refer to each other's comments. Feel free to chime in. The less I talk, the better. So let's get going. So first, maybe question to Emily, our guest from DC. From Minerva Technology Advisors. We actually work a lot together, so we are business partners, luckily. We are very lucky to have Emily on board, since she's one of the top experts on anything that's happening in DC on geopolitical policy making. Just perspective from DC, if you would describe how is the maritime space right now viewed from a DC perspective? What is the lens through which policymakers in Washington look at what's happening at seas right now, be it underwater security on cables, be it security of shipping lanes? What does maritime space actually mean to policymakers right now in DC?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the Aspen Institute for inviting me to be here. It's very heartening to see on the final day, the last session, with so many people in the room. So thank you for sticking around, and hopefully we can provide sufficient intellectual entertainment for the forthcoming 60 minutes. So the vantage point from Washington is probably an unsurprising one, and that is that the primary motivation continues to revolve around China. The United States sees China as a threat, as we have seen recently with the tariff and trade negotiations, in a dominance of supply chains manner, and this certainly applies to shipbuilding. So depending on which statistics you look at, China produces in the ballpark of 230 ships to one US ship. So this has become a priority not only under the previous administration, but also under the current administration. And the goal here, as with other areas and sectors deemed critical to national security, the idea is to expeditiously increase domestic supply. That is easier said than done for several reasons, which I will get into. But again, the idea is to counter Chinese dominance of a supply chain that the United States views as absolutely necessary for forthcoming geopolitical power. The Biden administration realized, and Kurt Campbell wrote about this recently in Foreign Affairs magazine, that it is very challenging for one partner, the United States or close allies and partners, to do anything on their own. And this relates to scalability. And in fact, China is very adept at scaling. The structure of their economy allows them to vertically integrate and churn out content that can in turn afford them great geopolitical leverage over supply chains. In order to scale in a sector as complex as shipbuilding, the United States concluded a trilateral arrangement under the Biden administration called the ICE Pact. This is a partnership between Canada, Finland, and the United States, where each entity plays one critical role over the supply chain. The net effect is to leverage each party's comparative advantage in order to create economies of scale so that jointly we can produce additional ships over the long run. It is rumored right now in the final stage of the trade negotiations ahead of the expiration of the reciprocal tariff deadline on July 9th that the Republic of Korea and potentially the European Union are also interested in exploring some potential partnership on shipbuilding as an addendum to a broader trade agreement. That in turn leads me to my final comment, and then I'll hand the floor back to you, which is that there's a tendency right now to look at Washington and think the United States is actually not doing anything on trade that's proactive or affirmative. And this is actually something that we heard quite a bit towards the end of the Biden administration, where a lot of foreign partners had basically become disaffected by certain provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act or the CHIPS and Science Act. In reality, I think that's a little misguided. It's quite clear that the United States is no longer pursuing formal, binding, and enforceable free trade agreements in the WTO sense, but it very much is pursuing these new national security-driven economic security arrangements. And so, to your point, if we actually look for the right indicators, we can very much see a proactive effort to build resiliency in critical sectors. And through the White House creation of a shipbuilding office, through the SHIPS Act in the Senate, there certainly is room to partner. And I hope that by partnering to identify inputs to ships, we can help cultivate that economy across borders and make it the partnership that it deserves to be.
Fascinating. So, fairly described as it's basically maritime capacity building, which is one of the foundational parts of how the U.S. is actually viewing the geopolitical importance of the seas. I just wondered if you think about other aspects which are important. There was a lot of, let's say, articles and interests of the geography basically changing because of climate change as ice is melting and new shipping lanes are opening up with all that comes with it, be it a negative or a positive with regard to national security and trade matters. How serious is maybe to both of you? How seriously is the debate or is the new perception of new shipping lanes across the Arctic driving a reassessment of how important is the maritime power projection of the U.S. and its allies?
You want to start? I do think it's a very important consideration. And while I am suspect that you would hear from the White House right now, the root cause is climate change, I think there is broad agreement that the profile of ice is changing, and that's opening up the ability of countries from around the world to increasingly send parts of their fleet into strategic areas. I was actually just in the Arctic in October, and it was actually interesting. I was on the Norwegian side, and depending on who you talk to, there's actually not total agreement about the timeline for when solid new durable lanes will open. And so it seems like there could be maybe a 10-year time horizon for that really becoming a problem. And I think this has precipitated a lot of the U.S. thinking to really spur action now, taking a proactive step looking ahead.
Mm-hmm. I think this is where we're really facing maybe hybrid threats. Obviously, for those of you who aren't familiar with Cisco, I always say we're a technology company that connects everything to make anything happen. And one of the things, the more you digitize, the more you need to protect it. But I also think there is this increasing threat just based on weird weather. We are not necessarily anticipating, but this is also where I think technology can play a huge role in providing us some insights. I do think this is one where, as you imagine the future, I was thinking about your known unknowns and knowns. These are some of the things that there are unknowns in terms of the pace of shifts and changes, but there are also things that I do believe we can model out and therefore plan for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe on the, it's interesting, apparently there's no agreement on how quickly geography is actually changing, right? So I find this quite fascinating. If you think about geopolitics, the geo part in geopolitics was always assumed to be basically fixed, right? It was a fixed variable. Geography doesn't change, right? I mean, Africa is moving 1 centimeter per year or whatever, so geopolitics shouldn't change because geography is changing. I think we're now basically in a unique moment in human history where geography is literally changing because of melting ice, and we look differently at the northern hemisphere of the planet simply because it now means different things, as there is not plenty of ice making connectivity very, very difficult. So from that perspective, I think it's for political scientists, this is quite fascinating to see how the geo in geopolitics actually means something because it's changing, and it's changing within our lifetime. So that's from a geo perspective, that's warp speed what's actually happening there. But maybe going to the practical side of things, just curious to explain a little bit further of if from a German Navy's perspective. Is the Arctic and the changes in the Arctic top of mind? Is that something that's operationally relevant for planning and for alignment with our allies?
It is. First of all, to the Aspen Institute, thank you for the invitation again. Happy to be here and contribute. And the question is very relevant. Our Arctic policy, our Arctic security policy has changed in the last 2-3 years significantly. We published last year in September the new so-called German Arctic policy guidelines. For the first time, we have a full chapter dedicated to security aspects, and it's their first chapter, the highest priority in the German policy guidelines. A strategic document agreed amongst the whole government. And since then, we tried to operationalize. We did see the changes in the Arctic environment, the challenges, but also opportunities coming along with the changing environment in the high north, in the Arctic, when it comes to shipping routes, when it comes to access to resources, rare earths, etc. There's a lot of potential coming here, but also a lot of risks and threats. For that reason, we anticipated several developments, and we said we need to have a better understanding of what is going on, and we need to cooperate better with our allies and partners in the region to ensure the security of the region. The Arctic has been a little bit in the background for several decades. We assumed the Arctic is a separated place, a place of cooperation, stability, peace. And the Arctic countries cooperated on several aspects. They always in the Arctic Council excluded security as one of the aspects, but in economic aspects, social aspects, indigenous aspects, they cooperated. That has come to an end with the Russian invasion to Ukraine. Russia was also part of the Arctic Council. They are currently suspended. They are participating in some virtual working group meetings, but not in the official rounds taking place. And the aspect of security was now back introduced to the Arctic surrounding countries. So also to NATO. So we introduced the topic of the Arctic to NATO, and NATO is currently being introduced to the Arctic. So there are developments, more presence in the Arctic. NATO is looking if they need an Arctic strategy. We Germany have a new Arctic strategic document, and we are doing things. This year, in July, August, we will do a first national deployment to the region. We will start in Iceland, do cooperation with Iceland, exercises. Then we will continue to Greenland, do exercises around Greenland. We'll have a port visit to Nuuk, to the capital, and then we'll continue to Canada to participate for the first time as Germany in the Arctic exercise Nanook. So that is a big change, and we are now looking into other capabilities. We do have some capabilities already in the armed forces which are prepared to operate in harsh environment under Arctic conditions, but we try to expand this in cooperation with our allies in the region. Denmark, Norway. Norway is one of the prime partners, Finland, but also Canada or the United States.
Excellent. Maybe then turning directly to the consumers of the security of the sea lanes to our all benefits, which is commercial shipping. Just give us what is your, if you inside of HAPAC, how do you discuss the Arctic right now? Is it in the strategic plans like 10 years out? Is it of immediate interest? Are you adapting for what time frame actually?
It is not of immediate interest, I have to say, because container shipping is not based on speed. What we're doing right now is we bring down speed because of sustainability. If you bring down speed by 4 to 5 knots, you can save 20-30% of energy consumption. Secondly, we don't believe that for the moment safety and security is set. So if something happens, recently we had a ship burning for 4 days on the Atlantic, and then if there's nobody able to help you within a day or 1.5 days, because with high winds or tornadoes, you won't get help by the air. So this is something, and even thinking about, potential pollution, accidents, what is happening there? Is there a network of assistance which is available. So this is something which needs to be prepared in the next years. So we are not very much focused on that as well. Secondly, what we should look at is we are not like airlines going A, B, A, B, A, B. We go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and so on, right? So we have several ports we call, and for us it's not important to be very fast going, so to say, home to Europe or to the US, wherever you want to go. But we need the ports, we need the economic centers of manufacturing and consumption. And so the Arctic route is not this important for us.
Okay, interesting. So before I come to Mikko and jumping over to the ICT-related topics here, I just want to ask you two guys something which I find like it's an interesting, say, not a contradiction, but it seems like after the 2000s years, we had a situation where parts of commercial shipping was actually threatened not by too much geopolitical power projection, by actually not enough. It seemed like there were parts of the oceans which were becoming less safe for commercial shippings. We had the Horn of Africa as a problem for roughly a decade, which cost like 6 billion a year or something. Like it was a serious issue where it basically could argue it wasn't too much geopolitical power projection, not an overbearing dominance of one power or the other, not even a geopolitical competition that led to the problem, but rather a neglect. So not enough actual power projection there. That's one perspective on things. I wonder if you look at the space, and I briefly mentioned it in the introduction, it seems like despite all geopolitical competition, we are somewhat still connected and interested in global trade, right? That's something that's high on China's agenda. It's an export nation, as Nico might elaborate on. It's built its whole economy on it. It's actually trying to become less dependent on trade because it sees the risks now. We are dependent on trade. So do you see from your perspective as practitioners of maritime security and commercial interaction, do you see a space where the parties which are competing geopolitically come together and agree on, be it explicitly or in practice, on we need to project geopolitical order in the maritime space to keep us all connected and have a space which is safe for commerce? Is that happening, or is that something that you anticipate, or do you think it will escalate?
Well, from my perspective, I would say, coming now from the Ministry of Defense and the political department there, the understanding of geopolitical order and what the interests are diverging. For cooperation, you need certain overlaps in interest and a certain trust as well. So, zooming a little bit out, you mentioned the threat of piracy. The threat environment, as we all know, has changed. Piracy has shifted or adapted. We don't see it at the Horn of Africa anymore in that amount. We see it in other places. We have seen it after the Red Sea attacks by the Houthis and the shipping lanes having been changed around Africa and different regions re-emerging on small numbers, not on a big scale. But we have other threats. And I mean, you can open the news any day. The last days, we are currently at the brink of anything could happen on the Arabian Peninsula, in the Arabian Gulf, at the Horn of Hormuz. That will impact also trade, supply chain, shipping, etc. So we have different threats. That threat environment has changed. If you zoom in now on a very operational or tactical level, yes, we operate with different stakeholders in the same maritime region. For example, we did operate at the Horn of Africa with Indian ships, with ships from Bangladesh, from China, etc. And on the tactical level, there is coordination. They will speak to each other. They will coordinate and cooperate. Even it's not the same operation, not under the same mandate, not under the same declared aim and interest, but they cooperate. That is going on, that is happening. We also, we talked about the Arctic policy. We also have a policy for the Indo-Pacific, where we mentioned we have a very much inclusive approach to the Indo-Pacific region. For that reason, on the military side, we are open to cooperate with many countries, and we did with our Indo-Pacific deployments last year in India. We did cooperation exercises in India with India. We are doing with Indonesia, Malaysia cooperations. That is happening because we find always some common ground here, the basic common ground of trust and common interests. It is a little bit different maybe with China. We did have cooperation in different areas with China, also in the military. So if you look, and that is open information, we did provide medical training for Chinese specialists a couple of years until the Corona pandemic happened. So there was cooperation, but we couldn't find this common ground in the area of maritime security yet.
Yeah, so from our point of view, the last 6 years have been pretty unprecedented for our industries, for our industry. I mean, looking back from 2010 to 2019, that was the worst shipping crisis we had, shipping lines burning billions of dollars. Then we were in recovery mode, then COVID started. That was a real disruption of the supply chains. Within COVID, the war Russia-Ukraine started. We didn't have enough water in the Panama Canal. We had the Red Sea coming with the Houthis, where Red Sea and Suez Canal is no longer used, so we left end of 23 and are no longer crossing the Red Sea. We had strikes at the East Coast of port workers. We have the terrorists right now. We have the Strait of Hormuz. And does anybody feel that the shelves are not full? No. That's what the saying in our business always, freight or cargo finds its way. So even if the Suez Canal is not used anymore, okay, ships take the detour. It's 14 days longer from Asia to Hamburg or to Antwerp or to Rotterdam, but you don't feel it. So yes, we would need better coordination. We would need more predictability, which is really difficult. Times are very unpredicted, and we need to have lots of resilience to be prepared for the next disruption which is coming up. And we are not very confident that we are sailing into more, let's say, peaceful or more coordinated times. Unpredictability is great in our industry at the moment.
Certainly an industry where you need strong nerves. I mean, I had the opportunity to visit one of the biggest commercial harbor operations in Europe, in Piraeus actually, so your competitors. And if you look at the operational needs they have on tracking in real time what's happening, this is not a job for people who don't like stress, I can tell you. So I think we all owe them a thank for managing that chaos on a daily basis, right? The crisis is the normal in that business, right? And that's something I think we do not appreciate in outside of logistics and of infrastructure jobs. So finally, coming to the Chinese perspective of things, maybe just picking up there, we heard the US perspective on maritime space from Emily. If you reflect on how is Beijing looking at the maritime space right now with everything we heard about the Belt, it's almost too boring to mention again, but Belt and Road Initiative has been in the news for years now, mystified as this mega plan to world domination, to all the conflicts we see right at the doorsteps of China with the 9-dash line, etc. BP. What is we mentioned, Emily, that industrial capacity building in the maritime space and shipbuilding and shipyards is one of the major focuses of industrial policy in China. So lots going on there. Give us a rough picture. How is Beijing looking at this space? Does it even look for as a unified strategic perspective on things? Because the question is always interesting, like how strategic is Beijing? I think we project a lot of this is all master plan-ish kind of things. I wonder, is there a coherent meta strategy that's informing what China is doing in that space? What is your take on China and the seas?
All right, a very big one. And if you ask me whether this is all integrated and Beijing sits there and just moving the pieces, no, it's not. But I think we can go back 15 years, 13 years more specifically, and China laid out its maritime strategy in pretty clear terms, both on the security side but also on the industrial side. So yes, there is some coordinated thinking behind the buildup of capacity, behind the ambitions to shape the legal space around maritime, behind its ambition to shape diplomacy around it. So I think, ambition strategy, we can tick the box there that this is a pretty solid integrated perspective on matters. It's not necessarily an implementation, but I find it remarkable the extent to which top leadership in Beijing is very explicit, for instance, about the fact that deep sea exploration is a core strategic priority, similar to space, obviously. But they're mapping the geographical space in let's say more profound ways than we do, and look at this from a long-term perspective. So short answer, I think, to a very, very big question is yes, we have a higher degree of strategic intent, a more sophisticated, integrated planning around maritime, and also, I think, obviously, the capacity to build up, as Emily mentioned, through vertical integration and maybe also civil military integration, a more powerful maritime power projection at the end of the day.
The Arctic, from a Chinese perspective, what's the latest thinking, strategizing around it from Beijing, or in Beijing?
Look, I mean, this is, again, I mean, we've been seeing the build-up of its posture over time in pretty significant ways. Self-definition as a near-Arctic state, an attempt to collaborate with partners in the region, this being a strong issue of contestation, but also Latin coordination with Russia increasingly, which is remarkable. The shipbuilding, the testing of maritime routes, etc. So all of that is continuity, frankly, but continuity on a very high level. If there's one country that is prepared for the opening of the Arctic routes as a long-term geopolitical turning point, I think it's probably China.
Interesting. So maybe jumping to a very recent crisis that we are experiencing. So if you just thinking again about this how would cooperation or how does competition actually look like in practice? Strait of Hormuz currently in the news. It's a major artery for supplies to China. It's important to China apparently that trade continues. You could argue, well, and on that we agree probably that we don't want to have it closed, including the Americans. How do you, has anything remarkable happening or in a discussion about this topic in the Chinese news over the last 2 weeks that might be noteworthy for us?
Not specifically on the traffic. I think that was probably more interesting a few years ago when China and the Houthis effectively coordinated on special agreements and deals to maintain access for Chinese shipping and not necessarily in a coordinated way with other diplomatic partners. I find that extremely remarkable. I haven't watched too closely, frankly, this development, but I think you see the importance of it if the top leader comes out with a high-level statement that they have an interest in that and are watching it very carefully, and obviously with a balance of blame shifting that is not necessarily aligned with our assessment of the situation. But I expect China to play a significant role in that conflict as it plays out, because, as you say, they have very strong maritime interests and they're expanding.
All right. We have quite a diverse range of topics here, right? So I might do a switch here from the maritime part to more ICT-related topics. If there isn't anyone has an urgent fishy question on maritime space, not the case. There's one. Please introduce yourself briefly and wait for the mic.
Hi, thank you. I'm Tushar Shetty. I produce and host Beyond the Indus, which is the Diplomat magazine's South Asia and Indo-Pacific focused podcast. It did mention South China Sea in the title as well. So I'd just like to know the strategic implications of, let's say, a situation in the Straits of Malacca, which a significant percentage of Chinese imports and exports as well go through. And what is the shipping industry's thoughts on that? And does Germany have a military plan for that or a contingency plan at all? Thank you.
You can start. All right. Yes, the Strait of Malacca is a very vital, relevant choke point, as others are in the world. And we, as I mentioned initially, we are living in a changed threat environment. So many security challenges we are currently experiencing. And especially Germany on its own is very limited. I mean, we still have the smallest fleet in the German Navy in our history. Well, that's the truth. So we can't be everywhere. So we need to cooperate with our allies, with like-minded partners, within NATO, within the European Union, but also outside. With India, for example, or other countries, Australia, we do a lot of cooperation with Australia, South Korea, Japan, etc. So we do these cooperations, but we can't be everywhere. So it's important to make these plans with our allies, with our partners, to look on these hotspots, on these choke points, how we address the challenges, the risks there. So, for example, we also, when we look in the Indo-Pacific region, we talk with our allies from the Netherlands, from Denmark, from UK, from France, who have national interests in these regions. So we try to address it commonly and come up with a common plan, not just a German individual plan to meet these challenges. And currently, I must admit, our focus is actually more on the area which is surrounding us. The North Atlantic, the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, that's where we mass our efforts on this behind the background of the current threat environment.
And I can just add that Strait of Malacca, of course, is extremely important. Asia is the factory of the world, not only for the neighboring Asian countries. So the intra-Asia trade is the biggest trade in container shipping. Second biggest is Far East to Europe. We see some shifts in production going from China to India. So India is getting more important for container shipping. But we also see that Southeast Asia is coming up a lot. Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia, really picking up lots of business. Are we thinking that China will be less significant in the future? Of course not. And it would be dumb to think that China will lose its huge importance of being the factory of the world. The kind of goods which are manufactured, that might change, but China will keep number one for the world, we believe, with some shifts we might see on short term. So yes, Strait of Malacca, I mean, lots of different canals, straits, whatever you call it, is extremely important. But as I said, if anything is closed, freight will find its way. Probably not by ships, but by air, by land, by whatever, right? Mm-hmm.
I agree on this one, but just maybe one qualification. There are a couple of goods which only produced in one place, which are extremely important to the ICT industry, and if something's happening there, we might actually have a real crunch with regard to supplies, so that's going to be difficult. That's the segue basically to our ICT part of the panel. Mary, Cisco is a customer of, I would suppose, of shipping lanes like Hapag. The supply chain, the value chain of our industry is, let's say, geopolitically challenging, as a lot of the technology is developed in the US or in the West, but we actually have outsourced production big time over the last 20, 30 years to a region which is geopolitically very volatile. So we heavily tilted towards efficiency over resilience. So looking back, Cisco is one of the foundational companies of the digital world as we know it, right? Not much would have happened with the internet without Cisco. What are the main vulnerabilities? If you look at it as a customer on the whole situation, as a hardware-driven company, what are the main supply risks that you see right now in the ICT world?
I mean, you mentioned the word resilience, and I do think that capability is really going to become a competitive advantage. And I think as you think about embedding security, sustainability, connectivity, I do think it can protect our trade routes, and I think it really can secure our future. But I also think when you look at physical infrastructure, I always think about, is it underpinned with digital resilience? So when you think about whether it's undersea cables or ports or our grid, all of these areas need to be connected and then ultimately secured. And I mentioned that hybrid threat. I mean, we are now living in a world where we do see cyber threats to our maritime trade. I do think we've also seen, I come from the US, weird weather where all of a sudden something happened that just takes out a particular area that we did not plan for. I would say when we think about digital resiliency, this is a different perspective. I think when I started in the technology field, you thought about things had to be always on, that you had to have multiple redundancy. But as you underpin it with sustainability, what you're looking for is, are you making things more energy efficient? Are you using the ability now to put things in idle and turn things on? But you've got to have that capability. I think one tension point that I'd love to introduce is when I look at a great partner of ours, the work we did at the Port of Rotterdam, really digitizing their whole experience. So if you think about smart meters, more and more IoT, or these devices that are providing information, more intelligence at the edge of your network, really automating logistics, making sure that you're creating efficiencies, the ability to have sensors in containers, the ability to have a whole lot of information. The other big trend that's happening in tech, which I'm sure you all are aware of, is this explosion of what could generative AI do. So the more data you have, the more you've got to potentially leverage AI to make sense of it. But then that creates the energy requirement. So I think when I look at ports right now, it really is the intersection of the energy transformation, the digital transformation, and maritime. I'll give you an example. When I think about reaching our net zero, as we deploy AI-ready data centers, I need more energy. We need more forms of energy. Two organizations, two startups that we invest in. One, a new form of energy, a wave technology in the ocean, this huge buoy, Core Power Ocean. It's something that we are investing in. Another startup that happens to be German is Plan Blue. It's using AI to really intelligently map the seafloor. And from a sustainability perspective, I care about that because I can grapple with the health of the ocean, the blue carbon, but it also gives you more information about what's happening there. So I think that I start thinking about the ports, and now you're not just competing with the different container ships and pleasure crafts out there, but more and more forms of energy. We invested in a company that's a floating wind turbine, so it's becoming increasingly complex. And so when sometimes I think about sustainability, people automatically go, it's energy efficiency. But you mentioned load shifting. We've got to think about how we are ultimately pulling all the different levers. And so when I think sustainability is about a really reliable, resilient supply chain that is supported by data and security, but it's balancing kind of the need for security, the need to deliver the business outcomes, providing that flexibility in the supply chain, that whether it's geopolitical, whether it's a weather event, whether it is demand, it allows that intelligence to ultimately be able for us to plan for the need and ultimately the solution.
Well, let me add one thing there. You were talking about Rotterdam, right? I think Asia is far ahead with that. Europe is following in fast speed. US is far behind, sorry to say.
Yes.
Because, I mean, the unions of the port workers have fought successfully for many years to digitize ports. And the last strike we have seen at the East Coast, the demand was 73% of salary increase, right? And with the negotiations now, they finally have a little paragraph saying, okay, we might permit to have some digitization in the ports. So we need to see that in other ports as well. Just give you a number. To lift a port from a ship or to bring a ship from a container from the land side on board of a container ship in Hamburg is roughly, depends on your contract, $140. In Los Angeles, which is the most expensive port in the world, it's around $350 just to lift a container. Yeah, and you lift like in 1 minute you lift like 5 or 6 containers, and we will probably leave 4,000, 5,000 containers with one ship, and we go there 3 times a week, and then add 52 times a year. So you are in a 3-digit million amount of money. So we need to see that worldwide in the key ports. So this is something where, of course, this is not the fault of the government, but it's the fault, sometimes a lack of flexibility, a lack of, permit, automation, digitization, and new technologies.
Maybe just staying right there, because land-based cranes for sea shipping rings a lot of bells, Emily and Miko. We had, I think, a couple of discussions around that topic in DC and probably also as a reflection in Beijing. There was a regulation in the US after some reports on non-documented, apparently, communication devices attached to some of the cranes, which are, of course, completely digitized, right? So these are Internet of Things devices, literally. There were rumors that there were some communication devices which weren't documented. That led to the assumption that this is a backdoor spying scheme invented in China to spy on what's unloaded in US ports, led to a ban of Chinese-made cranes, where I think have 60-70% of market share worldwide. So most cranes come from China, actually. So big thing in a small community, I admit. But it was a hot topic, since the regulatory tool is interesting because it's basically a complete ban of these technologies in the US. So it was big for the industry. So we're in the middle of geopolitics, actually, if you look at some crazy shipping cranes. Emily, maybe give us some more background on how the thing developed and what it means for the future of IoT.
Sure. Well, I was thinking when you were talking about the benefits of digitization, that digitization is also accompanied by a significant risk. And that's something that we certainly see playing out even in the last few weeks, not only in the crane context, but also in the fallout from the spiderweb attack by Ukraine against Russia. And since that attack has come to light, there's been a reassessment of Chinese capabilities on US soil. And it's been widely reported in the news that there are pronounced fears that the Chinese may have been able to ship via containers similar devices onto US soil that have then made themselves available deep inside of US territory. And you can either say on one side, well, if you look hard enough, it's easy to find something suspicious everywhere. Or you can say, actually, digitization and the weaponization of IoT devices is actually a very serious strategic concern long term. And the way that the United States government has gone about this in the last couple of years is to stand up this new team under the Bureau of Industry and Security, which historically has regulated the control of exports of US products and services and technologies going abroad that could be used by a foreign military. In recent years, they have begun to control imports, and this has largely been relegated to the IoT domain. I think we're at the very beginning of seeing something much bigger. The question is, what is actually a threat? Where do we draw the line on what we control? Because if everything is connected, then it's very easy to control everything. I think on your point as well about the benefits of digitization, there's one reality in which the ability to scan containers and the ability to see things in real time can provide a major security boost, a big asset. But that in turn relies on deep interoperability across borders. And it certainly, and Ansgar has written about this extensively, doesn't look like we're headed towards an era of additional digital interoperability, but rather that we're splitting into digital factions. If that's the case, then the security argument in favor of additional IoT, I think, might become a little bit shakier.
I think this is where there's a huge opportunity, I think, for all of us to understand the state of the art of the technology. There is, I do think, significant technology out there that may not be up to date with the latest security capability. So one of the things, as we're embedding security into the network, right? It touches everything. One of the things that we are incorporating the benefit of AI is, imagine you've got this AI canvas that is watching, ensuring what's private needs to be private, but they're looking, anticipating, trying to determine what a threat is. The ability for it to ring fence that particular threat. This is where you're really seeing a connection between, in the technology side, like the network operators and the security operators. So AI now can provide you with a recommendation, but you now can also bring in other colleagues to kind of jointly investigate and take action. So there is more intelligent, but at the same time, I think we don't always understand that the threat may be that we're not necessarily designing, as we're thinking about our strategy, as we're thinking about its digitizing, is it also secure? And probably another capability is, do we have enough individuals with the cybersecurity capability that we need? So this is another area of investment that I think is so critical.
Brilliant. I fear we're already like running out of time almost. I want to close. We have like 10. Okay, maybe jumping back, taking a little step back and focus again on the big questions of alliances and cooperation. Maybe two questions to all of you, and feel free to jump in. Primarily starting with Mikko. Two questions. One is Kevin Rudd, former Australian Prime Minister, one of the China experts in the world, described it, I think, very well by saying, look, we need to structure our geopolitical competition. We need to have 3 layers. One is we need to manage our red lines, the stuff that's really so dangerous that a hot war is a real risk. So Taiwan, etc., pp. That's number one. We need to contain the risks of a kinetic war. Number one. Number two, we will have a space where we will compete as geopolitical competitors. That's number two, and we need to define the space in which we compete, be it economically, whatever. But we also need a space where we cooperate. So literally, the planet is in flames, right? So climate change doesn't stop simply because we are competing geopolitically and have other stuff on our minds right now. So that's an ongoing issue. We have the stuff that we talked about in the maritime space. We probably have joint issues and not destroying all the infrastructure that we put on the bottom of the seas. So how do we actually organize cooperation regardless of the fact that we do not trust each other and that we are geopolitical competitors? And just draw the parallel to the Cold War. So we had, when the Cold War stabilized from the end of, let's say, from the 60s on, you had a level of cooperation, right? So we had, at some point, we had Helsinki. We had a joint vaccine strategy against polio, agreed on with the US and the USSR. So they could agree on vaccines. Imagine that. I mean, after COVID, we couldn't agree on anything, right? So just shows how bad, basically, the state of global cooperation is right now, as we are in this, I don't know which kind of transition period. So how do we actually, what is the right framework to think about these 3 layers? What would be your suggestion on how to build this cooperation despite lack of trust? That's number one. The second question is, referring to one of the most important managers in the history of Hapag-Lloyd, was Albert Ballin. I'm not sure if you're aware of him, one of the most fascinating German personalities, I guess, in the 19th century. So he was a top manager of Hapag. He was a nationalist. He was a Jewish German patriot, very much committed to his nation and his state. But at some point, he deeply felt that we're heading towards an abyss. Shortly before the First World War, he started lobbying Berlin and London and other capitals to make sure everybody understood what this catastrophe would mean, a war between these powers. So he was one of the first, I think, industry leaders who not stayed in his, let's say, business environment, but literally reached out to make sure everybody in the political space understood what they are doing if they destroy the cooperation that we had. And I think he was right all along. Tragic end, he committed suicide at the end of the First World War, but one of the most interesting German leaders. So I wonder, what is the role then of industry leaders today as we are heading against, towards a time where cooperation is called into question, where it seems to be plenty of people are quite keen to destroy the world that we were used to, like with glee destroying institutions that we have built for this purpose. I wonder if you have an opinion on what is the responsibility of corporate leaders in that space. So big questions, and please pick one if you like to, but also if you from the audience have any remarks on that. Actually, it don't need to be questions, so please also comment on the last 2 questions I put out there. Just feel free to engage. Whoever is first. There's one over there. But maybe starting first with Mikko, because I addressed you in the first place, and then we come over to you.
Well, thanks, Ansgar. Again, big questions. Look, I think we need to be very realistic. We're entering a phase where infrastructure and the connective tissue of our world is going to be not just fragmented, but extremely contested and a domain of power contestation. Undersea cables,